All right, I think I'm all ready. So, tonight we are going to be talking about genomics testing. Genomics testing is something that I use in my practice with a lot of my clients. And we're going to be talking tonight about what genomics testing is, but more importantly, how you can apply it to your lifestyle regimen, your self-care regimen, what you eat, how you exercise, what supplements you take. And also discuss how this kind of genomics testing can be used for both short as well as long-term goal for your health. In addition, kind of juicy part of tonight's workshop, I'm going to be sharing my genomics test and talking through how I'm using my genomics test to, again, meet both my short and my long-term health goals. So let's dive in. If you have questions, put them in the chat. I'm happy to answer those as we go along. So let's first talk about the difference between genetic testing and genomics testing. This can be a point of confusion for a lot of people, understandably. So genetic testing is used to understand the risk factor for rare genetic conditions. So, a lot of people are familiar, for instance, with genetic testing for Down syndrome as an example. Genomics testing is different in that it's looking at how your genetic profile could potentially be interacting with your environment. And what's interesting about this, and something that I emphasize to my clients anytime that we run this test for them, is that your genetics do not 100% lay out what your future holds. So a really great example of this is the ApoE4 gene. That is the gene that is associated with Alzheimer's. Now, if you have that gene, does that 100% guarantee that you're going to develop Alzheimer's? No, it actually doesn't. What's interesting about Alzheimer's is that people who don't have the genetic profile for Alzheimer's can develop it. And then people who do sometimes don't develop it. And what we know about Alzheimer's, for example, is that it is very driven by a number of different factors, some of which are really in our control. So blood sugar balance is a huge factor for Alzheimer's, and inflammation, and also keeping the brain really fit. And we're going to be talking about that quite a lot tonight. So, we'll be talking about my genomics panel. How am I using that information in my day-to-day life in order to take care of myself, right? And that may mean supplements, that may mean diet, that may mean how I organize my exercise regimen, how much sleep I do or do not get. And also, what I find very empowering about getting this information is that it helps you to understand what your expectations should be for your body, right? And if you are a person, for example, who has a really difficult time metabolizing caffeine, that's that's data that we get on this genomics panel. I will say that I don't think that's probably the most important information that we get on a genomics panel, but nonetheless, it's there. Are you a person who you drink a cup of coffee and it stays with you for like 5 hours? You're just like wired, right? Or do you metabolize caffeine really quickly? And so you get a little bump from it, but it's gone really fast, right? How does that change the way that you organize your life? For most people, they know that they have that response to caffeine, right? When I go through a genomics panel with a client, they already know, yes, I'm a person that can have a double shot of espresso at 8 p.m. and go to bed at 11, no problem. So some of the information on the genomics panel, people already know, right? They didn't really need that test to tell them. But other components that come up on this test are really quite remarkable, in that there would be no way to have this knowledge ahead of time. And one of the most important things for everybody to consider when they're considering doing genomics testing, and something that I talk to my clients about extensively before we even do this test is your mindset, right? It's so important to develop a mindset of positivity, of being proactive, of looking for the opportunities rather than being afraid of what may or may not happen. Okay. And as an example, say your genomics panel comes back saying that you are at a high risk for joint and collagen breakdown. What does that actually mean in real life? So, what that translates to is that maybe you're more prone to injury. Maybe you're more prone, in particular, to joint injury. Maybe you're more likely to sprain your ankle than somebody else might be. Okay. You really have two different ways that you could look at this, right? The first way would be, oh my gosh, my genetics are just so bad and I'm destined to, sprain my ankle and have a bad back and et cetera, et cetera. Or option two could be, wow, I'm so happy that I have this information. This is so empowering, right? I'm going to be proactive about how I use this information. Since I'm at a higher risk for joint and collagen breakdown, you know what? I'm going to integrate more collagen into my diet and really be consistent and intentional about that. I'm going to make sure that I eat an anti-inflammatory diet, okay, to help support that inflammatory response in my joints. I'm going to limit my sugar, okay, which is really important for joint health. And I'm also going to reevaluate my exercise routine. Does my exercise routine feel like it's supportive to my joints, or am I constantly feeling like I'm going to hurt myself? Okay. Another really important question there. How am I recovering from exercise the next day? And interestingly enough, the genomics panel also gives us data on that in terms of how much rest and recovery a person might need after they exercise. So as we're going through this data tonight, and as you're considering whether or not genomics testing would be a beneficial piece to add into your self-care regimen, again, I would encourage you to be mindful of your mindset, to notice when something kind of scares you of like, oh gosh, I don't know if I even want to have that information, or uh, what do I do with that information if I have it, right? Am I going to be obsessing about whether or not I could develop that disease because I have some of the genetics for it? Again, what I would encourage you to do is to really lean into the opportunities that are available to you here, both in the short term, but also the long term. There are things that you can start doing tomorrow to make your quality of life so much better, that then in turn, the things that you do today can influence you 30 years from now. Okay. So, uh, again, your genetics are not your destiny. You really have a really important opportunity here to take this data and utilize it to take care of yourself in a much more pragmatic way. All right. Next piece that I want to talk about here is that when we're looking at genomics testing, and you're going to see me do this tonight when I'm reviewing my genomics test, again, it's important to not look at any piece of data in isolation. Okay, and that's particularly true when it comes to health. If you are at a high risk for having high cholesterol, for example, we don't want to, again, just assume that that's your destiny and that that's your current experience. It may not be your current experience, right? We want to actually look at current blood work on you. Do you actually have high cholesterol? Are your genetics actually expressing in this way? If they aren't, then we can kind of pin that and keep an eye on it for sure, but not spend a lot of our precious time on that piece. But let's say that you are at a high risk for high cholesterol and your blood work shows that you do have high cholesterol. Okay, Great. Then what are the next steps? How can we proactively approach this? And again, really make the best use of that information for you. I want to talk briefly about what type of genomics testing I use in my practice. I'm so thrilled and excited about this test. I just love it. And I'm not getting paid to do this workshop tonight or talk about them at all. I just love them, and I um, really do appreciate having this test in my practice. It's making a big difference for a lot of my clients. So the test that I love is called a 3x4 genomics test. So why do I love this test? As a practitioner, they have just an insane amount of education and information available to practitioners. And given that genetics is a incredibly complicated and ever evolving field of study, having a really strong education background in that field is really, really important. So from a practitioner standpoint, I really appreciate that. From a client-facing perspective, there are three things that I really love about the genomics panel. So the first thing is that it prioritizes your genetics for you. Okay, what the heck does that mean? It takes all that genetic data, and it captures it in a really actionable way for you. So what you'll hear tonight as I go through my genomics panel is that the 3x4 organizes the data into a high priority. In other words, you have a lot of genetic SNPs, okay, that are coming together to create a scenario for you that is more likely. Okay, therefore it's a higher priority. It needs your attention. Then we have high priorities, then we have medium priorities, and then we have low priorities. Now, again, we can't look at this in a vacuum. What if you have a low priority of blood sugar issues, and yet your blood sugar is off the rails on your blood chemistry panel? This is a situation, again, where we need to use multiple different points of data in order to really understand both short and long-term goals. So number one, I love that it organizes the data in a really usable fashion. Number two, related to number one, the way that the test is created from a graphics perspective is quite beautiful, actually. And again, because genetics can be incredibly confusing, the way that they present the information makes it very easy to consume, especially for people who are not trained in genomics, right? For clients who, are interior decorator, right? Or a case manager. This is not their field in the least, right? But they can look at this test, they can see the graphics, and they can start to really understand it. So that's an awesome part of this test. And then number three is really simple and yet makes a huge difference. It's such an easy test to do. You take a little cotton swab, you swab out your mouth, you put it back in the vial, and you send it off to the lab. I mean, it doesn't get much easier than that. So that's super helpful. And then another benefit to this test is that it never changes. Like, how cool is that? So like the genomics test that you get today, you could use 10, 20 years from now. Your genetics are not going to change, right? Now, certainly the technology and what's available 10 years from now, 20 years from now is certainly going to change, but those genetic SNPs are what they are. So you can take this test, you can take it to your doctor, you can take it to any practitioner that you work with in the future, and they'll be able to assist you and layer in that additional data into their plans for you. Okay, so super helpful in that way. Who is a genetics or a genomics test for? Okay, so like who would benefit from a genomics test? Well, everybody is the short answer. Okay, and then there are people where I will highly recommend to them that we dig into this data a little bit more. So people who have an autoimmune condition or like a chronic condition like I have, like polycystic ovary syndrome. Genomics testing can be incredibly helpful for these people who are actively managing a condition. Okay. The information, the data that can be provided can be incredibly transformative and eye-opening for managing those specific conditions. So I'm going to get ahead of myself here just briefly, but in my genomics panel, I have what's called a heavy hitter gene called the GTSM1 gene. And that is incredible information for me to have. What that means is that I don't make glutathione in my body. That gene is deleted. Well, who the heck cares? It matters so much because glutathione is arguably the most important detox tool that we have in our bodies, and I don't make it at all. Okay, which means I need to take it. I need to supplement with it every single day for the rest of my life. Why would I do that? Well, because PCOS is a very inflammation driven condition. And if I'm lacking the ability to detox, that's going to make inflammation very difficult for me to deal with. Okay, so right there, that's just one piece of many pieces of information that I've gotten from my own genomics test that is a total game changer for me. Okay, other scenarios in which I would recommend a genomics test for people who have a strong family history, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, obesity. This can be very eye-opening for people who really struggle to lose weight. And as a matter of fact, we can again use the data in this test to help people better curate their exercise and diet plans in order to address that. And so from this perspective, again, this gives you an opportunity to start to plan now for conditions that may be possible to develop in the future, right? And again, as we go through my genomics panel tonight, you'll see that I'm at a high risk for vascular disease, which means that my blood vessels are more likely to develop obstructions. I'm also at a high risk for cholesterol, high cholesterol. Okay, that's not a great combination. Being at a high risk for high cholesterol and at a high risk for vascular disease. And there's also a family history there of cardiovascular disease. So that is such incredibly helpful information for me to have right now as a 40-year-old woman to be able to put into play uh, for my 60, 70-year-old self, right? Uh, as a basic rule, what you're going to see tonight as I go through my genomics panel are really, we want to look at the data, right? But let's go beyond the data. Let's talk about the application. So I'm going to be talking about how I've used my genomics panel in order to tweak my diet a bit. I've tweaked my supplement regimen a lot, and I've also tweaked, and I'm in the process of tweaking my exercise regimen extensively. Okay. And um, as a yoga and Pilates therapist, I worked with people who have chronic pain for many years. And that's something that I struggle with is a lot of chronic pain. It's written all over my genomics panel. So I didn't really need to have a genomics panel to tell me that, but nonetheless, it's there. And so I have always done yoga, Pilates, and some sort of cardio as being kind of my main exercise routine. And after reviewing my genomics panel, I realized that I really need to integrate some other pieces into that. So those are, again, like those really actionable steps that we can take away from a genomics panel. And then the last thing that we want to ask as we go through this is, and we've touched on this already tonight, is, are your genes actually expressing themselves in tangible ways? So, question number one, Does your blood chemistry panel show that you have high cholesterol, for example? Okay, it's not just enough that your genetics are set up for high cholesterol. It's a whole other question to see if your blood chemistry actually shows, if your labs actually show that you have high cholesterol. Other considerations: do you have the symptoms of what your genomics test is showing? All right. There is quite a lot of data on brain health, okay? Brain health, mental health, mood, etc. on this genomics test. Even if you have the genetic makeup of being more inclined towards depression, anxiety, etc., is that actually happening in your life? Okay, is that actually a symptom that you have? A really important question to ask. And then the last one is my diet, my exercise regimen, my lifestyle, how I sleep, how I handle stress, all of those aspects, my relationships, are all of those pieces working to help my genetics, or are they working against me? And again, this is where we can have the biggest impact on the genetics that are tested in this particular test. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, with the ApoE4 gene that is linked to Alzheimer's, that is not a death sentence. Okay, even if you have that gene, it does not mean that you are going to develop Alzheimer's. There are so many different components that go into brain health. First and foremost, actually being gut health. The relationship between the gut and the brain barrier, they are one and the same. So if someone is dealing with kind of chronic gut inflammation, that is also simultaneously affecting their brain. Now, if you also have the ApoE4 gene, well, that makes us stand up and listen a little bit more, doesn't it? Okay. We don't want to let those what seemingly small gut issues um, go by the wayside, right? Oh yeah, I have constipation a couple times a week. Sometimes I have diarrhea. Sometimes I have bloating after certain meals. And we've got the ApoE4 gene as well. I would suggest in that situation, yeah, we need to do some deeper digging into what's going on with your gut, because it has a tremendous impact on the brain. And we need to do everything that we can in order to set you up so that those genes are less likely to express. Okay. Then again, back to where we started at the very beginning of this workshop, there's a big difference between the genetics that are tested for rare genetic diseases like Down syndrome, for example, and this genomics test that I use in my practice. I am not testing for Down syndrome in this test. That is not included. Okay. So the genes that are included in this genomics test are ones that are highly, highly influenced by how you take care of yourself. Therefore, when you have this data, you can then be really empowered to know just how to take care of your genes so that the ones that you want to express, express, and the ones that you don't want to express, don't express. And some genes are really positive. They have a very, very positive effect on your health. Okay. All right. So that's the overview of genomics testing, kind of the lay of the land. And then let's dive in to my genomics test. So, first and foremost, I want to talk about why I wanted to run this panel for myself. So, and we talked about what these elements are already. So, first and foremost, I have a chronic condition, PCOS, that I want to manage, okay, to the very, very best of my ability. And I will say that I think I'm doing just an absolutely killer job at managing that. And the second reason, which actually I'm realizing now I actually did not mention. So the second reason I wanted to do genomics testing was to optimize my health. Okay. The three reasons why people should do genomics testing is if they have a condition that they want to better manage, they have a health history, or they want to optimize. And optimization is oftentimes something that athletes are really, really into, right? They're in really good health, everything's going well, but they want to get that extra edge. And this genomics testing can really help with that. So for me, I wanted more information and help in managing PCOS. I have various family histories that I wanted to inform myself a little bit more in terms of my own genomics and then in terms of helping my child. And number three, I love to exercise. And I have a, I have a history of chronic pain and an injury. So I'm very, very careful with the types of exercise that I do. And so I wanted a little bit more nuanced information about what was going on with that. Okay, so let's see what we got. So as I talked about before, the way that this panel is broken down is that it breaks the information up into very high priority, medium, and low priority. If you are on my newsletter, you are going to get the recording of this workshop. And then also in that newsletter, you're going to get some screenshots of my genomics panel so that you can get a sense of the graphics on this test and really start to see how they're presenting the information, which again, as I mentioned, I just think is super cool the way that they went about navigating a very complex topic. So if you're not on my newsletter, be sure to reach out so that we can get you on there and you can take a look at some of these images. Okay, so we're going to talk through the priorities of my genomics panel first. So, and this is a long list, you guys. I'm not going to go into all of this in great detail. I'm going to kind of like cherry pick some of the components that are very much front of mind for me right now. It takes me about 90 minutes to go through a genomics panel with a client, build out kind of their diet, supplement, and lifestyle recommendations, and talk through all of that information. So I share that to say this is an incredibly data rich test. And for the purposes of our workshop tonight, it's just not feasible for me to go through all of that information. Okay. All right, so let's go into the very high priorities. So, very high priorities are bone health, collagen and joints, injury, and vitamin D. So, let's talk about bone health first and foremost. There is a history here in my family of osteoporosis. Now, I'm a 41-year-old woman. I can never remember how old I am. I'm in my early 40s. Let's put it that way. I need one of my friends to tell me how old I am. I think I'm going to be 42 soon, but who knows? It clearly doesn't matter that much to me. Gratefully, I am not yet at a stage in my life in which I really need to be thinking about osteoporosis. However, what's ironic about that statement, right? And any woman or man who has osteoporosis will be sure to correct me, and they're absolutely right. This is exactly the time that I need to be thinking about osteoporosis. As a matter of fact, I wish I'd had this data about 10 years ago because I would have made some different decisions. Okay. So, bone health equates to osteoporosis. All right. I'm at a very high risk for bone breakdown. Okay. What the heck am I going to do about that? Great question. As I mentioned earlier, I do a lot of yoga, Pilates, and walking. Okay, those are awesome. They're great exercises and they don't hurt my body, which I love because again, I tend to have chronic pain. But from a bone building perspective, it's not going to cut it. It's just not. So I have since I'm in the process of of making over my exercise regimen pretty extensively and integrating a lot more weightlifting into my weekly program. I will tell you right now that I am struggling. I'm on the struggle bus right now in terms of just getting into a new habit. And I want to address that here in this workshop because it's just so real, right? Everybody struggles to bring new habits into their lives. There's not something wrong with you if you're struggling to put all these self-care components together. It's hard work. It takes time, it takes energy, it takes a lot of mental capacity. It takes a lot of planning, okay? Uh, I got my new workout regimen. I'm using this program called Pvolve. Again, not paid for that at all. I just really like what they're doing. I can do it at home. It's a bunch of weightlifting. I got that program in December, and then me and my family got hit with the stomach bug and like every other virus known to man for about a month. And there's been no weightlifting going on, to say the least. Okay. That's okay. I know this is a priority for me. And it is so motivating for me to know that I have, again, this high risk of bone breakdown. So in my head, I'm thinking to myself, okay, even though it's hard to make this shift, even though you're struggling to build this new habit, it's really, really, really important. You got to do this. Okay. Other components that are on my mind for this, vitamin D is really, really important for bone health. And I'm also at a very high risk for vitamin D deficiency. So you can see how these two very high risk things are actually working in conjunction with each other. I need to optimize my stomach acid levels. This goes into a whole other world that we're not going to talk about a whole heck of a lot tonight, but gut health is certainly a very large, large part of my practice. And optimizing stomach acid levels is something that every single one of my clients will tell you I am fanatical about. And uh, what's cool is that this 3x4 genomics test actually lays out for you in your test, hey, these are the top 3 things that you should be focusing on for your diet in order to support your bone health, for example. These are the top 3 supplements that you should be taking in order to support your bone health. These are the top 3 lifestyle things that you should be doing in order to support your bone health. And the lab will do that for all of those very high priorities. So one of the supplements that they recommend in their recommendations is stomach acid. Okay. And why is that? Because bones are made from nutrients, not just calcium, right? When people think about bone health, they just think about calcium, and that you're missing the boat if that's all you're focusing on, right? You really need to be absorbing all the nutrients from your food. How do you do that? The most important first step is stomach acid, and most people are incredibly deficient in stomach acid. Okay, so what am I doing with this information now that I know I'm at a very high risk for bone breakdown? As you can see, I'm figuring out supplements. I'm changing my exercise regimen considerably. It's affecting my mindset, right? I'm having a heck of a time changing my habits because I've been working out the same way for the last 20 years and I got to change that. Okay. And it's going to take some time and some patience and some grace. And I'm working through it. But again, it's highly motivating for me that I have that information. Um, let's move on to vitamin D because it's certainly related to the bone health piece. I'm a very high risk for vitamin D. This is a really great place where we want to ask, hey, do you have the symptoms of low vitamin D? What are the symptoms? Fatigue. You get sick frequently. You are more depressed in the winter, or you just feel more tired in the winter. I live in the Pacific Northwest where it is gray a lot of the time. It's very common for people in the Pacific Northwest to be quite deficient in vitamin D. So, yes, I do have all of those symptoms. Okay. Now, question number 2, do my labs show that I have low vitamin D? Yes, they do. All right, good. We're really getting onto something here. Okay, so this is a great example of where my genetics are expressing in very tangible ways for me. Okay, it shows up on my labs, and symptomatically, I am experiencing the symptoms associated with low vitamin D. Now, you can see here the difference between the bone breakdown information and the vitamin D information. There's not a lot of symptoms of bone breakdown per se, okay, until you're in the middle of it and you break your hip and you wonder what the heck happened, right? vitamin D, oftentimes, okay, you may not know actually that your symptoms that you're having are related to low vitamin D. Okay, but if you're a little informed about what that looks like, you're feeling the effects of that. Okay. But again, that genetic panel acts as that double check. And then what's cool about it as well is it helps you to optimize that vitamin D utilization and also can be a nice guide for choosing the right vitamin D, particularly because people who have a very high risk for vitamin D deficiency have a little bit more trouble with utilizing vitamin D, and thus they need a specific vitamin D to help them with that. Okay. I want to touch briefly on this collagen in joints and this injury. These are very high risk factors for me. I'm smiling because I did not need a genomics test to tell me that. Like, this has been my lived experience. And yet at the same time, it's oddly reassuring. So I'm like, wow, I haven't been doing anything wrong here. And no wonder I spent 20 years of my life as a yoga and Pilates practitioner focused on working with people who have chronic pain, because I myself have been taking care of this aspect of my genetics all of my life. Okay. I hurt my back so badly when I was 19 years old. And again, I'm 41, 42. Who knows how old I am at this point? I've been dealing with that back injury for the last 20 odd years and managing it very, very well, I will say. But there was about a 6-year period there where it would go out on me every quarter or so, and I couldn't even walk. I mean, it was debilitating. That doesn't happen to me anymore, thank goodness, because I have all the tools and everything that I need in order to mitigate that. But when I look at this, high priority that I have both of those things, collagen and joint breakdown and injury, I'm like, yeah, you sure do. That's been my lived experience, right? Okay. Again, I'm not going to, I dived a little bit more into the weeds here with these high priorities, but I'm going to start kind of moving a little bit faster here. So then we get into my high priorities. Again, these are not very high. They're high, so they're still important, right? Memory and brain health. Okay, so I'm at a higher risk for developing some of those dementia. I don't have the ApoE4 gene for Alzheimer's, but again, that doesn't mean that I can develop it, right? What am I going to do about my memory and brain health? I will tell you right now that my memory is shockingly bad. And it always has been. I think it's worse now. And so one of the things that I'm integrating into my kind of quarterly self-care regimen is to do the Cambridge brain test, which is a way to just kind of gauge how your brain is doing. And what's cool about this is that I'm going to integrate brain exercises for myself, which could be as simple as, okay, I'm such a list person, right? Because I can't remember anything. If it's not written down, I won't remember. But what I'm trying to do is to not make a list, to keep the list in my brain so my brain has to work hard at it, and then challenge it. Okay. And what you can see over like a quarterly basis of using the Cambridge brain test is that you can see improvement in different areas. And the Cambridge brain test will also help you guide you in terms of what aspects of your brain health you really need to focus on. In addition to that, learning new things is probably the very best way to challenge your brain. And God knows that in my field of work, I have to learn new things constantly in order to stay on top of all the new research that comes out on functional medicine. Exercises that involve hand-eye coordination. So, I have not learned pickleball, but I hear it's amazing, and I would love to learn how to play that, and that would be a great thing for me to do for my brain, right? Okay, so other things that I've got going on with my high priorities: vascular health, high cholesterol, blood pressure. Those are all sort of like the aspects of my genetics that are negative, if you will, that I really need to track and pay attention to. But I also, some of your genetic SNPs can have a positive impact. So here's some positives. So I have a really good exercise response. So what does that mean? It means that I can use exercise in order to maintain my weight. Now, from a standpoint of having PCOS, one of the classic symptoms of PCOS is obesity. Okay, so if I didn't know what I know about managing my PCOS, and all of this was new information for me, I would be thinking to myself, okay, I have an opportunity here to use exercise in order to help keep my BMI in a really good place. Power. So genetically, I respond really well to exercise. In other words, I build strength and endurance quickly. And so to that end, I have an opportunity there, and I really should build it into my exercise regimen, that I'm kind of consistently challenging myself, right? So that I'm not just doing the same number of reps at the same weight every week indefinitely. Okay. That I am really setting up a schedule for myself so that I'm starting to challenge myself, because I can. Okay. If I ran 1 mile this week, try for 1.25 miles next week, right? So that's really valuable information. Now, on the other side of things, I, genetically speaking, but I can also tell you this is my lived experience, I need more recovery. And that is something that they gauge here on this panel. And I need a day of rest in between my workouts. And when I say day of rest, what I mean by that is I need a little more sleep, but I also need a really strategically planned out stretching and really restabilization regimen in place in order to keep my back stable, in order to keep that chronic pain at bay. Now, again, as I've mentioned, I didn't need a genomics test to tell me that I need to have that regimen in place, but having this genomics panel available to me, having this data available to me, really just confirms my lived experience. Okay. One last piece I want to mention here, because I just think this is so cool. So this genomics test looks also at your nutrients. So I'm at a higher risk for being deficient in vitamin B12 and folate. Very important. Vitamin Bs are very, very important to basically every single function in the body. Now, interestingly enough, I also have this heavy hitter gene. Okay, so here's what I mean by heavy hitters. Heavy hitters are genetic SNPs that have just they're more powerful in their impact on your health. Okay, and I'm going to go through what some of my heavy hitter genes are, because it's super fascinating. But the MTHFR heavy hitter gene makes it so that it's difficult to take vitamin B and methylate it or turn it into something you can actually use in your body. Okay, so now we've got kind of a picture developing here, right? I'm at a risk for having low vitamin B12, low folate, but then I also have this heavy hitter gene that makes it difficult for me to make use of vitamin Bs. So now I've got 3 things that are saying, oh yeah, girlfriend, you are probably going to have some issues with keeping your vitamin Bs at a good level. And we also know that vitamin B is, for example, really, really important for brain health. And we already saw here that I have a high risk for brain function. Okay, so optimizing my vitamin B is a no-brainer, no pun intended, step for me to take. Now, what's cool about this is that you can take a multivitamin that has vitamin Bs in it, absolutely. But because I have these methylation issues, it's going to make a lot more sense for me to take a methylated vitamin B, right? Genetically, I actually need that methylated vitamin B. Okay. Now we can take this even one step further. Let's look at Ishbel's labs. Come to find out, my homocysteine levels are high. What does that mean? It means you need vitamin B. Okay, so here we have a scenario in which we're looking at the genomics panel and taking that data in. We're asking, does it fit symptomatically? And I can raise my hand and say, absolutely. One of the key things that vitamin B's influence is your energy levels. And that's a real struggle for me to maintain kind of a good high energy all the time. Also, vitamin B is essential, so important for cardiovascular health. And we talked about, right? I have this very high risk of vascular disease and high cholesterol. Not a great combination. I have a family history of that as well. Okay, so vitamin B's are not something to mess around with. Okay, that needs to be a very core part of my supplement regimen, and it makes a huge difference in my energy. I can tell when I don't take them. Okay, let's talk about some of these heavy hitter genes. I've already talked about some of them. The GSTM1, which is that detoxification gene, that was such a game changer for me when I read that, so that I can be sure to bring that glutathione in and really help my body to detox, which also helps me with inflammation, which is a key player in managing PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, which is the condition that I manage very well, by the way. Let's look at the COMT gene. Okay, and I've got the GG variant of that. I'm just going to read you here what the lab has to say about this, and then we'll kind of talk through this a little bit. I'm going to skip around a little bit. So, the COMT impacts the body's ability to optimize neurotransmitters, in particular dopamine. And it can cause deficits in planning, working memory, and attention. It can be one of the first signs of Parkinson's disease and other neurological diseases. Studies have shown that it can impact cognitive processing and impact performance overall, including lower memory scores. And again, I mentioned that memory is an issue for me, right? So, and again, this is from the lab. Their recommendations here is that a higher protein diet that balances mood and energy versus a starchy diet is really important. And I will tell you that from the perspective of having PCOS, for one of the big issues with PCOS is blood sugar, my fatigue, okay, and how that impacts my cognitive function, night and day. Okay. If I don't eat enough protein every day, I feel like my brain is shutting down. Just plain and simple. Okay. So I am a practitioner of this, right? Like I am knee deep in this information every day working with clients with this. But if I step out of this for a moment and consider somebody who has the condition that I have, for instance, the PCOS, or they have this heavy hitter gene, and they are eating, the classic American diet, which is frequently cereal out of a box for breakfast, maybe a sandwich for lunch, and a pasta dish for dinner. They are going to be rolling in very deficient on that protein consumption every single day. And they may notice that significant cognitive decline. And I shouldn't even say they notice it. It's just so normal for them. It's just the way that they always are, right? So how revolutionary is it for that person to start eating more protein and to notice, like, oh my gosh, my brain focuses so much better now than it did. Okay. It could be so transformative for someone. Let's see if there's any other one that I want to talk about. There's one specifically for bone health that we already talked about. I I do want to talk about this one last, and then we're going to wrap it up. So there's the MAOATT, um, and I have the T allele. Okay, a lot of these SNPs have kind of different ways in which they can express. So what this means is that it can lead to an increase in neurotransmitters, which I guess sounds like a good thing, but it's not. And it can be associated with aggression in men and women. Now, I consider myself to be a pretty self-aware person. I do not think I'm particularly aggressive. Maybe someone will correct me, but I think people who know me would be laughing at this right now. I'm not an aggressive person. So this is interesting, right? I mean, this is a heavy hitter gene and has a huge impact or is supposed to have a huge impact. And this just doesn't resonate with me at all. Okay. Now, there are other aspects of this as well. You know, people who have this, it's so important that they sleep well and a good amount. Oh my gosh. I have a puppy right now and I am getting up twice a night. It's a real problem for me. Okay. I am not getting enough sleep and it really shows. So, sleep is key. I know people who could sleep, 5-6 hours a night and they're totally fine. That's not me. Okay. Lastly, the other kind of aspects of this, which I find really interesting, is that people with this particular heavy hitter gene, they need to be more considerate with their stress management. And this applies to me absolutely. So, again, to help those neurotransmitters be more balanced. So, breathing exercises, meditation, yoga, anything to help support the vagus nerve. Those are key for me in my day-to-day life. Lastly, this gene can also be related to migraines, which is something that I have struggled with. And interestingly enough, in people who have higher estrogen levels or estrogen that's can be a little bit imbalanced, that can then trigger this gene to express itself. And what I notice with my migraines is that they tend to correlate with different times in my cycle where my estrogen is spiking. Okay, so if I can help to keep my estrogen in a good level, which I've learned how to do, I don't get migraines, right? So, again, as a totally new person to this, right, who doesn't know anything about a genomics test but is struggling with migraines and PMS, okay, and let's say has PCOS and osteoporosis or a history of osteoporosis, this test could be such a game changer for that person, right? We can change the supplement regimen, increase protein, really optimize lifestyle, stress management, sleep, supporting hormones to ensure that those estrogen levels are not creating that migraine situation. Okay. There's really just a world of ways in which this information can be applied. So, thank you all for joining me tonight. Tonight was a little bit longer than normal, but again, this is like such a deep, deep topic, and I am just truly fascinated by it. So I hope that you enjoyed. If you have questions, please send them to me. I always love to hear from you, and I will see you next time.